2007-15-57, sponsors Jameson. On page 11 of the agenda, this authorizes the collection of 4 tourist accommodation taxes to create a funding mechanism for the construction of a new downtown convention center.
So we didn't adopt that one already?
No.
Okay.
There's a housekeeping amendment. You want to explain this housekeeping?
This is purely technical corrections. When this legislation was drafted, it basically incorporated the provisions of the state law, and included within that were some references to some state law subsections that aren't applicable since this is going into the code. So it does not change anything substantively. It's purely housekeeping.
It just kind of like the previous amendment.
All right, is there a motion? Motion been made and seconded. This is on the amendment.
Second.
On the amendment. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Now, seeing as all those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. On the bill as amended, Councilor Evans.
I just have a couple of questions, and I think, Mr. Nolan, you would probably take these, because Mr. Manning's gone, correct? Yeah, I don't see. And the only reason I mention Mr. Manning is he and I have talked about this previously. The financing of there are two, correct me if I'm wrong, there are 2 ways to finance a convention center if this council or the next council and the next mayor ultimately decides to do that. Or let me back up, I guess, and ask Mr. Cooper a question. Mr. Cooper, our vote on this legislation does not bind us to construct a new convention center. Is that correct?
Right. This just authorizes the taxes to start being collected.
Okay. So even if we pass this, this council passes it, we won't have to go and build a $500 million convention center if we don't want to, correct?
You would not have to approve construction of the center.
And could we use the monies on our current convention center to expand that and improve that?
The taxes are only for convention centers in excess of $400 million. Now, some of the taxes possibly could be used for the existing center and tourist-related activities. However, primarily it's to, I mean, if the taxes are not used for a convention center, then they would just escrow, I guess.
Okay, so until such time as we decided we did need a convention center or a new convention center.
Right, and if I have been informed that the existing convention center, the taxes to fund that construction were prior to actually approving the construction of the center. So taxes, I don't remember how long, but I was told today that it was sometime that the taxes were collected.
Yeah, that's my recollection too. Mr. Nolan, we finance the a convention center if we ultimately decide to build a convention center. There are 2 ways to do that. A purely revenue bond issue, which would be backed by these taxes, and then a general obligation bond, which is how we did the first convention center, correct? Okay. Now, I guess just a comment then, if we end up ultimately doing a revenue bond issue for the convention center, and I'm not convinced yet that that's where we're going, it certainly appears to be, it seems to me that having a good record of tax collections for these new taxes will probably serve our interests and the interests of the city well, so that we have a better basis with which to make our decisions when that time comes that we do finance the convention center. So I support it. Thanks.
Councilman Jameson.
Thank you, Chairman Ryman, and actually Councilor Evans, particularly her last comment. I would like to echo not just the significance of having established what revenue streams there are objectively, but also it's important that if the day and time comes when a convention center is approved, those who are building it will incur some immediate expenses in architectural renderings, design processes, and so forth. And the revenue that has been generated to that point can be used and applied immediately rather than delaying the process that much more. I would also emphasize, again, Council Lady's earlier point that this is not binding on the subsequent council, but I think it's incumbent upon us to establish what objective information we can have for that subsequent council when the time comes for them to make the decision. And with that, I move approval. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Wallace.
Clear on a couple of things. If it's been made reference that it's not binding, but when you say it's not binding on the next council, these fees that we are permitting will be binding on people that be in the hotels. Is that correct,
That's
Mr.?
correct.
And for people, vehicles leaving the airport, it'll be binding.
Yes, sir.
For tax on rental cars, it will be binding. Now, let me say this. I'm not opposed to this. I'm gonna vote for it. But I need to have this information and point something out to you. What happens to the money if all of a sudden we've created a vehicle to come up with over $455 million in money? What happens? Who knows what the new council may do? What are our options on this money if we get it?
It's not extremely clear to me.
Oh.
The money,
I thought I was the only one had
the
something down
money
here that wasn't clear.
continues to be collected. It is designated for the construction of a new convention center. As I said, I believe some of it can be used for tourist-related activities. It does contemplate that if the revenues exceed what's necessary, that can be used for
And look,
tourist-related activities.
it may not be necessarily a bad idea. Suppose the next council didn't decide to do a convention center, but the one after them decided, then the money would be there.
That's correct.
So, I mean, when I raise these questions, I'm just merely pointing out, it ain't necessarily meaning it's a bad idea. I mean, it just may not happen in the next 4 years, depending on what kind of council you get. But I understand, and I'm going to vote for it, but I just have to take the opportunity to understand what I'm doing and discuss it, and then plus the fact, I want to try to see if we can use any of this money along the way to go back and fund those nonprofits that I be talking about.
Hey, Councilman, I'd like to remind everyone that this is not new, that it was done on the present convention center also back in the early 80s.